Welcome, everyone. The June 5th, 2023 meeting of the WVU Faculty Senate will come to order. Recognizing that some faculty are out of the office or may be traveling over break, we chose to change to the virtual format for today's meeting to provide additional flexibility for senators and participants who are not on campus. And since we're meeting virtually today, I want to go over some of the procedures just very briefly. Senators need to be promoted to panelists in order to vote on any resolutions or actions today, and to have access to the chat. So if you are not already promoted, please raise your hand so that the moderators can move you over to panelist. You'll need to accept the panelist invitation as well. Public audience will remain as participants. They can access the Q&A feature. Following our normal Senate processes, senators and participants need to be recognized in order to speak. So we ask senators to raise your hand to be recognized to speak. Other participants wishing to speak need to be recognized by a senator. So non-senators should communicate with one of the senators from your college and ask them to recognize you to speak. Once recognized, please state your first and last name and your college or school before you ask your question or state your comments. So questions and comments that are posted in the chat and Q&A may not be answered during the meeting. So if you have a question, please raise your hand to be recognized so you can ask your question directly. All right, so the first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the May 8th Faculty Senate meeting. Those minutes have been distributed as a link to the agenda. Are there any corrections or additions to the May meeting minutes? Hearing and seeing none, the minutes are approved as written. If there are no objections, I'm going to reorder our agenda today and take care of our regular business first so that we can then devote the rest of the meeting to an update and questions about academic transformation, the budget process. So are there any objections to changing the order of the agenda? All right, hearing none. So we'll start off today with our curriculum committee report from Chair Lori Ogden. Lori.
Hi, Scott. Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. I have several for approval items. The first is the new course report in Annex 1, the course change report in Annex 2, and then a program change to wildlife and fisheries resources, program change to the AOE Fisheries Sciences, and a program change to the AOE Wildlife Sciences.
All right, are there any questions for Lori about Annex 1, Annex 2, or any of the three program changes? All right, hearing none, we will bundle the new courses report, the course change report, and the program changes into a single votable item. Are there any questions or discussion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of approving Annex 1, Annex 2, and the program changes, please raise your hand. Lori, I see 68 panelists and 9 attendees. All right, please lower your hands.
Scott, excuse me, just to clarify, attendees.
Attendees, you have to be a panelist to vote. So we're counting 68. I think I saw 70 right at the end. 70 votes. If you're not a panelist, if you're still on the attendee side, please raise your hand to be promoted over to panelist. And all right, so let's see. Please lower your hand if you've already voted in favor. Are there any opposed? All right, seeing none, the curriculum report is approved. Next, we'll hear from the chair of the General Education Foundations Committee, Lisa DiBartolomeo. Lisa.
Hi, folks. Annex 3 details 4 new courses that have been added to the Jeff. 1 is new, 3 are course changes. And just for the record, we are still open for business on Jeffco and happy to accept new courses. I'm also happy to take any questions that you may have on Annex 9, which is our end of year report.
All right, any questions for Lisa first on Annex 3? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving Annex 3, please raise your hand. I count 74. Please lower your hands. Any opposed to approving Annex 3, please raise your hand. All right, seeing none, Annex 3 is approved. Are there any questions? I will get to the committee report a little later, but are there any questions for Lisa regarding the committee report? I did see one question in the Q&A, Lisa, about new courses being approved going forward. Do you want to say anything regarding that?
As far as the committee is concerned, we are happy to accept new courses. I think that there are some mixed messages coming out from some of the colleges, but the Faculty Senate and the General Education Foundations Committee, which own and supervise the General Education Foundations, are happy to continue to accept new courses. And any questions about that can either be directed to me and Scott at this time, or to Frankie and Mary Beth Angeline, who will be taking over as Jeff co-chair for next year.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Next report will be from Diana Davis, Chair of the Teaching and Assessment Committee. Diana.
The committee doesn't have a report for this month.
All right, thank you, Diana. Next, we'll hear from the Committee on Committees report from Chair Leslie Cottrell. Leslie.
Hello. What you see in the Annex 4 from the Committee on Committees is our established rosters for committee membership in the 23-24 academic year. Please note that we already have some changes to this, and we will continue to update everyone each Senate meeting, but these are our initial lists, and we appreciate everyone's time and consideration to volunteer for these important committees.
All right, any questions for Leslie about Annex 4, the committee rosters for the 2023-2024 term? Jennifer Ripley has a question. Jennifer.
Yes, I can't start my video for some reason, but I can use my mic. I had a question about the Shared Governance Committee. There's no one from Eberly on it, and there's no one from the Beckley or Kaiser campuses. And so I asked that either we hold off on that committee until those individuals can be placed on there, or at least consider that motion.
Leslie, do you want to comment about how that committee was populated and the number of volunteers you had, or?
Sure, absolutely. And Jennifer, thank you for that. I think every single one of those committees would say the same thing you are in terms of having representation that's broad like that, and particularly from our campuses. So the committee tries as much as possible to find those people by this date, so that we have it set, but that doesn't always happen. But know that that is on our radar and that we are continuing. You'll see some chair-elects. We're going to be working on that and really taking time to get people comfortable taking on those roles. So there's more work to be done, and I've written it down, that what you've listed, and we'll move forward with that. So, and then every month once we achieve that, we continue to add.
And I just saw there was a comment. There's also no representative from chambers on shared governance. So
now I have a question then based on that, as more comments come up. I haven't seen on the composition of shared governance that a representative of each college or unit is required. And if that is the case, then the committee needs to take that back and not just get these two, but others. So is there guidance on that from people who have been on shared governance before, or Dave? I see Dave's hand.
Dave, can you speak to that since Ashley is not here? Is Dave on? I can't hear him.
Dave was still in the attendees list.
Okay, can you move him over, Corey?
Just
Or
it.
Emily has her hand raised too.
So when the committee was originally made as like it was as an ad hoc committee. The general idea was we were wanting to try and get as much representation across the colleges as we could, although we never had full representation from all the colleges. I think probably, Leslie, if I can guess, it's those colleges aren't represented because nobody volunteered to be from those colleges. So it's not because they were purposefully left off. It's because we didn't have anybody volunteer for those committees from those colleges. So if people can help nominate individuals, we can, I mean, I would guess that we can add more people, but again, it's not that we didn't add people from the colleges. It was that there was no one willing to serve from those units.
Anne Marie.
Yeah, thank you, Anne-Marie Hibbert from Chambers. Emily, I mean, having been on committees, yes, the general idea was to try to get as broad a representation as possible. And I know people volunteered because I know I volunteered for the Shared Governance Committee. So I can't speak to every college, but I know I volunteered for that one. And I don't see anybody from Chambers on it. And this is not, I'm not saying that I should be on it. I'm just saying as one data point. So it may not be a great sample. So some work may need to be done on looking back at that. It's just my 2 cents here.
No, that's helpful. Thanks, Anne Marie.
Rose Casey.
Hi, Rose Casey, Everly College. Just kind of picking up on what Jennifer was saying and the kind of feedback that we've had since about the requirements for this committee. I wonder if it might be sensible for us to change that committee's requirements to make it so that we do actually have a representative from every college or campus. And if so, it would be a good idea to make that requirement today. I guess we would need a motion for that after discussion.
Or do you want to make that motion?
I could do. I haven't made a motion before, so don't entirely know how I would phrase it, but sure.
So let's say a motion to, so there was a motion to update the committee requirements for the Shared Governance Committee to require a member from each college or school.
Yes, that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is there a second for that motion? All right, I see multiple hands. Is there any discussion or questions regarding that motion? Let's see. Assad, you had your hand up. Are you wanting to speak about this
Yes,
motion?
Assad Dawari from Berkeley campus. As far as that committee, I volunteered for that, but I didn't see my name in the list.
All right. Thanks, Assad. Dave Hauser.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a friendly amendment to Rose's resolution to add the phrase "where practicable" to the thing. Sometimes people don't volunteer. Sometimes, for whatever reason, it's difficult to find somebody. But you know, the committee should make every effort to represent all constituencies. But you know, if you can get 16 out of 17, that shouldn't stop the committee from moving forward.
All right. So, do we need to address that motion individually, or Rose, are you okay with accepting that amendment?
That sounds good to me.
Okay. All right, so any further discussion? Gina Martin.
Hi, guys. This is Jenna from the law school. I put it in the chat, but just would that requirement require someone to be a senator, or could they populate the committee with non-senators just because our school is pretty small?
So generally, the committees consist of both senators and non-senators.
Okay.
Typically, we try to reach some balance of a certain number of senators and non-senators. So it does not require that the committee members be a senator to serve on the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Any
And-
further questions or discussion?
Well, just real quick, if I could add that, and this is for Assad particularly, Assad's fantastic and volunteers for many of our committees. The other thing that factors into our decision is when someone, a single senator or faculty, is on 3 or more pretty big committees. Assad is one of few, and when you get to campuses and other smaller units, you don't have as many volunteers. But that is, I do want to say that that's a factor too, so that we don't, overutilize.
Thanks, Leslie. All right, any other comments, questions? Okay, all those in favor of approving the motion to change the requirements for the Shared Governance Committee, as we've discussed, please raise your hand. So I see 77. Please lower your hands. Are there any opposed to that motion? Change the membership requirements. Kakan, are you opposed, or you just have your hand up still? So I see one opposed, Corey.
Noted.
All right, any further motions regarding the Committee on Committees report or membership in Shared Governance Committee? All right, seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you, Leslie.
Scott.
Did
oh,
we
sorry.
vote on?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Did we actually vote on the main motion item? The committee rosters there.
No, I don't think we did. My mistake. All right, so are there any
I'm
questions?
sorry, before we vote again, could you clarify, there are attendees that are voting? And I just
Those
want to-
attendees need to be moved over to panelists if they're senators. If you are a senator still on the attendee side, please raise your hand so we can move you over to panelists. I saw Suzanne Kitchen ask to be promoted. Okay, so we have Suzanne Kitchen and Lori Sherlock need to be moved over. And Ahmad Hanif.
Suzanne, your term doesn't begin until July 1st. Ahmad and Lori, you have both been sent invitations. If they're not popping up for you right now, you might need to exit and re-enter. Sorry about that. Okay, looks like they moved over.
Okay. All right, so any further questions or discussions about the committee rosters? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving Annex 4, please raise your hand. All right, I see 77. Please lower your hands. And are there any opposed to approving the committee rosters? All right, seeing none, the rosters are approved, pending normal changes that happen throughout the year. All right, the next item on the agenda is a report from the representative to state government. But Eloise does not have a report for today. She's on vacation. Andrea, do you have a question before we move on?
No, sorry, accidentally. I'm so sorry.
All right, so next we'll hear from the Board of Governors representative, Stan Heilman. Stan.
Right, so the board met on May 17th and approved the transformation timeline. It also approved that changes in rules go out for comment, and that's rules 3.9 and 4.7, which both deal with reduction in force. And then there was also a severance package that went out for comment. So I would implore senators to go on, or faculty in general to go on and leave their comments so that Ashley or Frankie and I know how to proceed with some of this. And then the next board meeting will be June 23rd.
Are there any questions for Stan? All right, seeing none. Next item, Kim Kelly.
So I think there have been a number of comments that I have received on BOG Talent and Culture Rule 3.9 from Faculty Welfare. Should I direct all of those folks to comment on the Board of Governors site, and how would you like to handle that?
Dan?
If you want me, I'm happy to answer that.
Sure, Stephanie.
Hi, Kim. Yes, that would be great if you could direct them to comment on the online comment form. I would greatly appreciate that.
Scott, I would add the same. I think that allows us to see common trends in this and get directions of where we need to head with some of this. So yeah, if they have comments, please put them there.
So the concern was that they would be identifying themselves and potentially putting themselves at further risk. That it was a forum and that they may be targeted or retaliated against for making a comment.
Stephanie, we've talked about anonymity in those comments. Do you want to comment on that just briefly?
Sure. So I'll just generally state as a comment, no one will be retaliated against for submitting a comment. But if somebody feels like they would like to submit a comment anonymously, they can do so by simply writing the word anonymous in the first and last name boxes, and then putting NA in the email box. You know, we don't know what, I mean, we don't vet whether that information is accurate or not. You just have to you have to put some text in the box to move the thing forward.
Thank you. That's helpful, and I will let those know.
Yep, no problem.
Frankie.
Thank you, Scott. This idea of retaliation seems to be coming up a lot, and I'm just curious. I'm actually very interested in knowing, has this happened? Like, what is this fear, or have people actually been retaliated against from the General Counsel's office and the Board of Governors?
So my impression is that it's not overt, and that people feel like they have been targeted simply because of being outspoken in some areas.
Okay, so
anyone else had an experience? Sorry, Scott, this is coming up a lot. And I think if people are being targeted in some way, we need to take that up. Like, we need to know who's doing that and talk to them about that. Because I feel like if we're all being civil and we're asking reasonable questions, giving reasonable feedback, there's no reason to be retaliating against people. And if someone is, we need to deal with that. So maybe if when people say that to you, if they could send that to Scott, me, or Stan, and we can follow up on that so it can be stopped, so that we can have an open flow of feedback and communication and let our voices be heard.
Yeah, and I feel like you know, the teaching assistant professors and people who are not on the tenure track but not yet tenured feel a lot more concerned about having their name associated with things, and they don't want to be perceived as a troublemaker or somehow problematic.
Point noted. Stephanie, there is a question in the Q&A asking how the BOG comments are being used and will they be shared publicly? Will they be answered? So can you comment on that?
Absolutely. And again, since you specifically mentioned the general counsel's office, frankly, I just feel like I have to say, I nor anyone in my office have never retaliated against anybody for a comment that they have made or in any circumstance. So I just feel like I need to say
It
that
was
from a
not you.
professional- Yeah.
It
from a
was not you.
professional perspective.
It was not you.
But to answer the question, Scott, yes, so the comments are gathered up in a chart and they are all presented to the Board of Governors unedited. So we don't edit anybody's comments, we present them as is. 10 days before the board will vote on the severance package or the new rules, which is at our July 31st meeting. So on or around July 21st, all the comments received will be publicly posted, and we do have a determination made column that responds to the comment. Those responses are in varying degree of detail depending on the comment. But for the publicly posted comments, we do redact the person's name and email address from what's publicly posted, just to sort of protect that in case somebody doesn't want to be, their comment publicly posted on a website in that vein. So, we do redact that information, what's publicly posted.
Thank you.
You got it.
Thank you, Stephanie. All right, so next item, I'll do my report quickly and then we'll move on to the program.
Ruchi Bhandari did post a question related to the BOG in the chat.
Ruchi, do you want to ask your question, please?
Sure. So one of our faculty have asked this, that some programs have been instructed to provide a normal BOG review information. Will additional information that is needed other than in the review be communicated with these programs following this initial document submission?
I believe that's a question for the Provost's office.
Scott, I think that is a Lou Slimak.
I believe it is, Marianne.
Lou, can you comment?
Is Lou on the?
He raised his hand.
Yes,
You
Lou.
might have to let him in, yeah.
Lou, I just gave you permission to chat.
Yep, thank you. There you go.
Is he there?
Yeah, he might have just had a small delay there for a second as he switched
There we
over
go.
to.
There you are,
Switch
Lou.
as panelist.
There we go.
The way I'm going to approach this right now is that the regular 5-year Board of Governors timeline will proceed. Any program that is identified through the summer's work of the Provost's office to complete a self-study over the summer that would have also been identified for their 5-year review that would be due this December will not have to complete that 5-year review this December. I'll work with them to have what they complete this summer satisfy the requirements of the 5-year review that would have been due for the regular Board of Governors process. Does that answer the question?
Sure, thank you.
Absolutely.
Corey, can you promote Andrew Nix to panelist, please? All right, so next I'll move on to my report. Just a reminder, first of the Country Roads Reunion Tour that's scheduled for June 13th. And this year we're partnering with Food for Preston to package meals for their mobile pantry and to load them for delivery. And we have currently 15 people who have signed up to attend the Country Roads Tour and participate in that service activity. We'd like to have 20 to 25 participants for that service activity. So please consider joining us for the Country Roads Tour. The registration information was sent out by the Provost's office. That email, the latest one, went out May 31st. But if you need information on how to register, you can contact me or contact Emily Murphy and we'll send you that link. Just a reminder, we have scheduled faculty senate meetings for July 10th, August 7th, and August 28th. All of those meetings will be held via Zoom to provide flexibility for people to participate. There's typically no regular business item agendas, so all of those meetings are focused on the transformation processes and the budget situation. Frankie Attack, as the Senate Chair, will preside over those meetings. I do want to make a reminder, again, the public comment period is open. So it's important that faculty, staff provide their comments on Board of Governors Rule 4.7 and the severance packages. We've received several requests for presentational efforts to recruit new students and boost enrollment. So we do have Sharon Martin, Vice President for University Relations and Enrollment Management, and George Zimmerman, the Assistant Vice President for Enrollment Management, scheduled to be at the July 10th Senate meeting to provide information on that topic. And finally, I'll give a very brief report on the Summer Transformation Work Group. That group is active. We've met twice so far. During the May 15th meeting, Provost Reed discussed the role that that group would play. Melissa Latimer provided some information on support and outplacement services that the Provost Office is working on to support faculty who are impacted by reductions in force. And Lisa Castellino-Gurgich discussed data analytics and some data challenges. And then at our May 31st meeting, Lisa Castellino presented additional detail regarding some of the financial metrics and analysis that they will use in the program evaluation process. And Associate Provost Mark Gavin discussed the academic support unit review process that the Provost Office is working on. And the work group provided very detailed feedback and suggestions on all of those subjects. So the next meeting is June 26th, and Fred King, the Vice President for Research, is going to join that work group to discuss potential impacts that transformation activities in the budget situation may have on research and the R1 status. So if anyone has questions they'd like us to address at that meeting, please forward them to Frankie and myself. That concludes my report. So are there any questions for me? All right, seeing none, I'll hand off to Provost Reed.
Great. Thank you very much, Scott, and good afternoon, everyone. Today for my provost report, I will be providing an update on our summer academic transformation work. And I will primarily focus on our program portfolio review process. As part of my report, I will be inviting others from my team and from the university leadership to share additional related information. And I do want to just preface this by saying I know there is a great deal of anxiety on campus, and our goal is to be as transparent as possible and to provide as much lead time as possible for those faculty and staff who may be affected by this work. So first of all, I want to say that we are deep into the data gathering process as part of our more extensive review of all academic programs designed to create a smaller and more focused program portfolio. What I will be talking about today is the centrally driven process versus the work that is being done at the so-called local level at the colleges and department level. And we know that those the colleges are really working to meet their budget reductions for FY 2024 and are already looking ahead to FY 2025. And they have been tasked with making some changes on their own. So I'll happy when at the end of this conversation, happy to answer questions about our process and as much as I can about the unit level process. To date, we have gathered both enrollment and net tuition data for academic programs, and we are finishing gathering data related to departmental costs. We are developing a framework for analyzing the data in partnership with the RPK group. It will be a data-informed process that also takes into account other factors, such as research productivity, in particular related to doctoral programs, enrollment trends over time, and the unit's contribution to the university's land grant mission. Some of this information will likely be provided by the unit during the program review process. This will be a two-part process. We will first identify a larger set of programs of concern, meaning those programs that have been flagged on one or more of the performance metrics that I just outlined. These programs will then go through the formal program review process as outlined by BOG rules. Each program of concern will then be asked to submit additional information. There is some information that is required by the BOG rules, such as description of mission and assessment practices, but it will be an opportunity for that unit to also respond to the data we provide and to give us any other information, really to make their case for why this program should be retained as is. My office will then review the report submitted and make our preliminary recommendations, which will likely be a smaller set of that larger group of programs. We are adhering closely to the timeline that we have communicated, and we will share the programs of concern with the campus community as a whole, not just the units affected, by July 10th. And we will be sharing our process with our deans, as well as the faculty summer work group that Scott mentioned throughout the summer and responding to feedback that they provide. A couple of other points that I think are worth noting. First of all, in the spirit of transparency, our contract with RPK is being added to the university's transformation website, and all invoices will be uploaded. We are asking RPK to help us in a number of areas, not just the program portfolio review, as indicated in the contract, as you will see. For example, they are going to be leading a review of some of our non-academic service units. RPK is working on an hourly basis, which means we are only paying for the work that they complete, and we have set caps on what we will spend in each of these areas. We are doing much of the work in-house to minimize costs, including gathering and analyzing the financial enrollment data ourselves. This has been a painstaking effort, taking at least 3 months, conducted by our Chief Data Officer, Lisa Castellino, and Institutional Research. Given that the stakes are so high, we believe it is important to work with an independent third-party vendor who has experience in doing this type of work for other universities. They add a second set of eyes to our work, ensuring that our data and analysis are accurate, that our methodology is sound, and that we are adhering to industry best standards and practices. But I think it's important to say that we are making and owning the decisions, not the consultant. The university also has a long-standing contract with EAB. They are not directly involved in this work, but they have provided context to what we are doing by sharing and updating national trends in higher education. EAB does a lot of work for WVU, including work related to enrollment management and student success through such systems as Navigate, which our advisors use to update information about students and their courses and how they're doing in the courses. The EAB contract will also be added to the website. I know there's an interest in this and we want to be transparent, but know that we will be reviewing how we work with EAB in the future, and it is likely we will be reducing some of the services that they supply to us. And now I want to turn it over to Stephanie Taylor to just talk briefly about some of the templates that will also be available on the website.
Thank you, Mary Ann. I'll be very short. In my presentation to Faculty Senate last month, I mentioned that we would have a detailed process document associated with the program review process, both the dean initiated and the larger provost initiated that Marianne was referencing. And within that document, we would have hyperlinks to templates of the notification and other documents that we'd be using both through the academic program review process, but also through the reduction in force process. So I'm just noting that we're in the process of finalizing those templates now, and that information should be posted on our transformation website soon. So you have the opportunity to go through, click through the document, see the sort of template or draft notifications or other informational documents that we're using throughout the process from start to finish, starting essentially from the week of July 10th through the end of the reduction in force process later in October. And that is all I have, unless anybody has any questions for me.
Stephanie, let's take all the questions at the end.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Marianne.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. We'll just get through our reports and then we'll all be here to answer any questions that faculty might have.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, no worries. All right, so we are also in the process of reviewing our academic support units or ASUs to identify additional efficiencies and cost savings. The ASUs, just to remind everybody, are mainly non-tuition revenue generating units that support a wide variety of academic activities at WVU. Ask Mark Gavin from our office if he would give you a short update on where we are with that ASU review.
Thanks, Marianne. And if it's okay, Scott, I'm going to go ahead and share screen just for a minute to put up a short slide deck. I am hoping that is, can everybody see this?
We can see that.
Perfect. So I'll keep this brief, even though it's slides, but just to give you guys information and keep me on track. As Marianne mentioned, we are in the middle of this process right now. This is a very close to the version that I shared with the faculty advisory group that Scott mentioned previously. With respect to the review process, these are the included units, and I will note that these are only units that report into the provost office. So I know as we've solicited feedback through a stakeholder survey, there have been questions asked as well as comments offered on other units that aren't on this list and questions about why they're not included. And the answer again is simple, and that is we only included the ones that report into the provost office. So those that are outside of our purview were not included within our process. But this gives you the list of nearly 20 ASUs that we are undergoing evaluation on right now. With respect to the different data sources we're using to conduct this review, we have asked the unit leads to complete self-studies. We have also asked for stakeholder surveys, and these stakeholders include faculty, staff, and students where appropriate. So broadcast messages went out inviting people to respond to these surveys concerning the ASUs or whichever ASUs the respondent chose would want to focus on. We have collected, where available, organizational charts. We have collected job descriptions. We're looking at personnel rosters. We're looking at operating budgets. And then where we need to get further information and clarification, we'll be following up with interviews, whether that be with the units themselves or key stakeholders for them. I'm not going to spend as much time as one would think looking at this very busy slide, but just to give you an idea of the dimensions along which we are looking at ASUs, there's several. And one is we're looking at strategic alignment. Does the unit have a good map onto university priorities, goals, objectives? And we want to be clear that that is clear. We're going to look at things like evidence-based and data utilization. What is the unit's practice in terms of assessing their effectiveness at moving toward those university priorities and objectives? We're going to look at, and Marianne mentioned that most of these ASUs are not tuition revenue generating, which is absolutely true. There are a few that are on the margin. Others generate some revenue through other sources, services, et cetera, fees. But what we're really looking at is what's the contribution to the university, either on revenue generation directly or indirectly through things like connecting to student success or overall university organizational effectiveness, but some case to make that it contributes either directly or indirectly to the university's ability to generate revenue. We're looking at effectiveness at operations too. Does the unit have a good practice in place of making sure that its resources are utilized to maximize its effectiveness, and making adaptations and collecting information to make adjustments along the way? Of course, we're in the middle of a budget reduction right now. And just as we're asking the academic side, our ASUs need to be in a position of entertaining the idea that they maybe need to take a budget reduction, and what would that look like? Are they willing to entertain that as a way to change their mix of services and activities they're involved in? Have they given that, and are they willing to give it a good thought process? And then the last is really kind of a collaborative spirit, recognizing that, you know, we all need to connect in some ways to other things that are happening in the university. Are the ASUs thoughtful in terms of understanding where those natural connections are, either with other ASUs or academic units? Are they willing to entertain solidifying and developing new connections as they land on their mission? So while this isn't definitive, this gives you a good idea of some of the ways that we're looking at how to evaluate these ASUs as that information comes in. With regards to outcomes, this is going to look a lot like what we are going to do on the academic side, and the same stands with the ASUs. As we get through the review process, it may be that we look at a particular ASU and say, everything's on track, continue in your current fashion at your current level of activity and staffing. We may, at the other end of the continuum, decide that it's really time to discontinue a particular unit. In the middle are a range of options, including maybe a reduced level of activity that would also translate into a reduced level of staffing. Maybe the unit continues on, but drops a few of its activities to focus on just what's core to the mission. We might revise the mission, which then in itself could lead to a reduction in level of activity or staffing. Or we may look for opportunities to consolidate or combine, either in part or whole, with another unit, being another ASU, or even, start embedding some services in some of the academic units. So all these are outcomes that are on the table. And again, I think the overall spirit here is, just as we're asking the colleges to take a look at themselves, and we're helping in that with the program analysis, we want to look at the ASUs and take the same opportunity to say, as we change as an institution, are there changes that we need to make in our ASUs that reflect the same? As far as, and my last slide is a timeline. We have already kicked off the process, as Provost Reed suggested. May 31st, the self-studies and stakeholder surveys came in, were due. We then handed off the stakeholder survey responses, which were all open-ended questions, to RPK to do a qualitative analysis and summary, which they've returned to us now. We are going to spend the better part of the next week collecting additional data, but then also reviewing all those data sources that I mentioned on the second slide. We will, on June 13th, come together as within the provost office, summarize our recommendations across all the ASUs and pass those along to Provost Reed. Following that, we will then take about the next month and a week to really dig in, and that's going to be especially in those center parts of the possible outcomes, where we might need to revise mission, reduce activity and roster, or even do some combinations and consolidations. We want to take some time to make sure that we fully consider the implications of that and land in the right space. So we're going to use a month and a few weeks to really get that right. What that means then is, with a date to still be determined, at the end of July will be a Board of Governors meeting. Our intent is to present our findings and recommendations there. Following the Board of Governors meeting, we will then step away at the beginning of August and inform our ASUs of any changes that impact them. And that is the process that we are utilizing. I will stop sharing now, if that's okay.
All right, Mark. So again, save your questions. We'll come back to everyone at the end and see what specific questions you might have about ASUs. And then finally, university leadership has been focused on looking at non-academic areas as well. You might have seen the news release about changes to our information technology unit. And to talk about that and some other items, Rob Alsop is joining us. Hello, Rob.
Good afternoon, everyone. Several weeks ago, we started a plan to merge the overall university ITS team along with the HSC ITS team. Bryce Knotts and team worked with Laura Roth and team to move forward on that transformation. The results of that transformation were started to work through and be announced over the last several days moving forward. And so there will be a restructuring of several areas. I will tell you that I think it was there are 14 positions from the restructure that are essentially new or re-engineered positions. They're not new as in terms of adding, but they are new in the sense that we've taken job duties and descriptions of things that may have been part HSC and part overall university. And so those positions have been posted, and a number of individuals within both HSC IT and General University IT have been encouraged to apply for. On the overall, it will be given the budget cuts, it will be an overall reduction of FTE, I believe around 6 positions. And those are being moved through the system as we speak. We're hopeful to have all of the jobs that are being posted filled and completed sometime by mid-July, and that process is already ongoing. We do think that, particularly as we move forward over the next several years, this new vision and set of efficiencies and synergies between those two programs will be beneficial for the institution, and also put us in a position to try to work through some cost savings to boot. We continue to look at other areas of the university, including shared services, fleet management, and as I indicated before, trying to determine the most cost-effective way for things like our provision of STEAM for the institution. And the finance team is in the final stages of collecting everything and rolling it up for the FY24 budget, which will ultimately be proposed for consideration to the Board of Governors at its June meeting. With that, I'm happy to kick it back to you, Mary Ann.
Okay, Rob, was there anything else you wanted to share? Is that primarily? That's fine. I wasn't sure if you had any other items you wanted to discuss, but that's fine. Okay, well, so the last thing I want to say is that we are continuing to move on academic restructuring, and we will be making announcements this summer and in the fall regarding some of those transformations and engaging with those units at that time. So that is it. So you've had 4 different items. You've had, I've talked, Stephanie talked, Mark talked about ASUs, and Rob talked about some of those non-academic areas that are being looked at as part of the transformation process. So we are all here and all ready to answer any questions you might have.
All right, so I have a couple of questions that have come in from different places for Rob to start off. So you mentioned kind of reviewing some of those other units, Rob. So what process are you using to assess those units? Is it a systematic process like the provost is using for the program review? And will faculty be given an opportunity to provide some sort of input like what the provost has done for the academic support units?
So happy to seek faculty input. I think as shared services, for example, has moved on, they on a pretty continual basis seek feedback on how they can be improving the institution moving forward, and those are embedded in that particular perspective. One thing I didn't mention that I know is on the front of everyone's mind is I've been working with Fred King on trying to move forward and in some of the bottlenecks with OSP I think a lot of what's being driven from a manpower and a process issue as it relates to working with Fred on OSP comes directly from faculty researchers in terms of the need to improve that particular process moving forward. And so if we think of, or if we move forward on additional areas of consolidation or transformation, I'm happy to engage Scott with faculty as appropriate.
So, I mean, are we looking at reductions in some of those units across the board that kind of report up other than the provost's office?
Well, yes, we are, but as we've also discussed, our non-classified and classified staff since 2014 are down over 400. And so for example, in 2019, we worked through a VSIP program where primarily from a non-faculty perspective, there were administrative costs that were eliminated moving forward. For excuse me, for a number of our facilities, and you can look moving through over the past several years as we've tried to protect the academic core. We've already taken some reductions as a result of the reduction in the FTE headcount for a lot of those units moving forward. So yes, I do think there'll be and a lot of the administrative units were given the responsibility for budget cuts moving forward. I think I just mentioned that IT has eliminating 6 positions as it moves through their particular perspective. And I know that in finance, in my units and others, there were non-renewals or RIFs that are moving through as we speak now. So I want to make clear we have tightened budgets before, and we took part in the budget cuts for fiscal year 24, and a number of our non-classified and classified employees have been let go as a result of that moving forward.
Right, kind of, let's see, I have a couple of questions. I have a few more I'll get to, but I want to give some folks the opportunity to ask questions as well. All right, so Kim Kelly, I believe you had a question?
Well, I had a comment. I think we've had some concerns about shared services. I personally have had a lot of struggles just trying to get someone hired and knowing who to contact. And I think, I hear you saying that the administrative staff is decreasing, but these are the kind of people that we need on our department levels to get our work done, right? So that we need people that can help us navigate like how to get people hired and how to get people paid, or participant reimbursement, or students to be hired. And I think whenever we think of administration, we're thinking of more the executive level. And so I think there have been a number of people expressing concerns about the growth of the executive leadership and also the people that answer to them. Is there any plan to reduce the number of people in that the executive leadership and the people responding to them?
So let me first say that, and I can talk about my unit. None of this has been a question that's come up. So when I was first hired at the institution, and I can't speak for everybody, when I was first hired at the institution, my title was Vice President for Entrepreneurial Engagement, Legal, and Government Relations. And the General Counsel, who is currently Stephanie Taylor, reported up to me, and as did the units that I just mentioned. When Narvel Weiss retired, he was the head of the Department of Finance and Administration. And so those units were retitled as strategic initiatives. I moved over and took Narvel's spot, and then my position was not backfilled. And then additionally, when Narvel retired, shortly before he did, Dan Durbin left the institution. And so Anjali Halibay took over a part of those duties. and then Paula Congilio. But there was no backfill there. Paula Congilio started acting as CFO, but there was no replace for the CFO at the HC Health Science Center as she did both jobs. So with respect of moving from that restructure from the VP of Finance and Administration to Strategic Initiatives, there were actually 2 executive positions that were not backfilled as it relates to those units. And so happy to go through, and I know there's been a request for some organizational information moving forward. And I'm not going to get into the particulars of a specific personnel action at the moment. We're all looking at how we can move forward in the best way possible from that particular perspective. Moving forward, I can't answer specifically for other units other than I will say that the bulk of the non-renewals for this July 1 are non-classified, which are the salaried administrative folks and not the hourly classified individuals. There have been a few classified, but overwhelmingly it's been the non-class.
And let me add too, from the provost level, I'm happy to meet with a smaller group and lay out every single position and sort of who we hired or who we let go. I mean, what I would say to you all is and I'm being really transparent, we've added 1 associate professor. I'm sorry, I'm still a dean in my head. 1 associate provost position since I've started, hired someone, and that was Melissa Latimer, whose primary responsibility is to oversee faculty development and culture. And it's a very much of a faculty facing position. We've elevated some people because either for retention purposes or because they were replacing people. They were replacing the job duties of people who left and whose positions we didn't replace. So we actually, we eliminated 3 very high positions, 2 in global affairs, as well as we did not replace our dean of online. So we've been making changes, but we just haven't necessarily shared them publicly. And also, I do want to say there may be a little confusion because we put everybody on the website, and that may not have been the case prior to that, to give people a sense that they are a valued part of this team. But really, I'm happy to sit down with any group and map out the positions we have and the positions we did not replace. But I feel, that we are looking at that, and we will continue to look at ways to make our office and the units that report up to us more efficient.
Yeah, I think there would be some
here,
interest in that.
I'm also happy to sit down with a smaller group and talk through the finance administration, legal, and strategic initiatives teams over a period of time to talk about those units as well.
Yeah, I mean, we could do that together. And if Scott wanted to organize a small group that wanted to sit down with us, it's just to go over every single position right now would not be effective use of our time.
Right.
Well, I'll reach out. Frankie and I'll reach out and we'll set that up.
Okay.
Frankie, you have a question.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Just wanted to follow up, Rob. I really appreciate that there have been changes over time. But I think the academic side has had a lot of changes over time, positions not filled, austerity plans, et cetera. So, but here we are. And so I think, what the faculty really want to know is that it's not just the academic side. And so I appreciate all the things that have happened in the past, but if we're going to be a smaller institution, which all of leadership says we are, and that's a necessity, it seems that a very good analytical assessment of the all of that infrastructure that reports to you also needs to be assessed in a systematic manner, unit by unit, to make sure it's right-sized. And so I think that's where this whole question is coming from. And there's a model coming out of the provost's office for how to do that, rubrics and things. And I know it may not be the same, but I think that's the spirit of what's being asked here. And I mean, I don't know if it's right or not. How many people does it take to do environmental services? I have no idea. but I know there's a lot of people in there and there are a lot of layers of management and things like that. Is that the appropriate size, you know? And I think there's been a sense we need to do everything we need to do now. Everything we've wanted to do, everything we must do. And I can't imagine but what there might need to be some shifts there as well. And I think that's where the question's coming from.
Yeah, so I'll say this. I am happy to go through an exhaustive review of each of the units that report up to me. I think if you look at what we've done over the past several years, and to be honest, if you look at the employment levels from a faculty versus a classified and non-classified staff, Frankie, to your question, the drops have been much more significant on the classified and non-classified side as opposed to faculty. And so if the desire is to do additional significant cuts on the administrative side of the house, I think that's a fine conversation. There was a question raised about staffing levels at shared services previously. And I think to not recognize some of those cuts and to say everybody's on an equal foot and we have to cut the same amount by everybody going forward, I think is a mistake. And to suggest that we're not working hard on the administrative side to make some of those changes and that we've been making some of those changes is not fair to a lot of folks that have been working hard on that particular side moving forward. And so I'm happy to go through the particular analysis. At the end of the day, it takes a certain minimum level of people to run the PRT unless we don't want to have it anymore. It takes a certain number of people to run shared services unless we want to delay the times that we get responded for hiring some of those things. And so happy to go through an additional analysis on each of those things, or if folks think that environmental health and safety is too heavy and we need to lay off people there, fine to have that. We just need to have a discussion with research and the work that they do for the chemical protection and all of those things for the institution on how we move forward from that particular perspective. Absolutely on that particular piece.
Just if I can follow up, no one is asserting you aren't working hard any more than the people who are being laid off. Anyone from administration is asserting they haven't been working hard. My question is, are you 100% confident that all of the pieces that report to you are right-sized for our new organization?
I've never said that at all. And I've never even suggested anything like that.
So Stefania.
Yeah, Stefania Stanish at Davis College. I have a couple of questions that faculty in the Davis College have requested be asked. So first one is, do the president and top administrators still use an helicopter and or private jet? If so, what are the yearly costs? And is this being considered as one of the line items for budget cuts? And the second question, have horizontal salary cuts been considered? For example, has the cost saving of deducting 10% of the salary above $200,000 being calculated as a way to save jobs and programs? Thank you.
Okay, so the university does not own a plane. There is a chartering service that the university does take advantage of, and it is that the proposed line item for that budget for FY24 has been reduced over expected expenditures for an area where there won't be as much expense for the institution. I don't have the particular number off the top of my head, but I'm happy to get those numbers and provide them to you. But yes, that is going forward. As it relates, I think your question was, why not just require everybody making over $200,000 take a 10% pay cut? That would devastate morale across the institution. And we are not going to be in a place where, we're going to require individuals to reduce the amount of their take-home pay moving forward as an institution. We try to work forward as it relates to market and compensate individuals fairly, and to just across the board require a broad swath of individuals to require them to reduce their pay, given that I think everybody at the institution is working hard, would be, we don't think that that would be an appropriate step to solve our budget challenges.
Victor Musino. Victor, we can't hear you. All right, I'll come back to Victor. Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, Amy Weiss Lowell is how I pronounce it, but Eberly College. My question is a little more of a global kind of perspective on how the long-term fate of the university will be able to be sustained. We have obviously these cuts that are occurring right now, and I actually have a PDF, or it's a link that I can put in the chat that shows we've been very effective at delivering the quality of instruction and educational opportunities at a very low cost, by and large, right? Our faculty salaries apparently are, as this infographic shows from the West Virginia West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy shows, like we're 47th in the nation. You know, nobody is here for fame and fortune and riches. You know, we're all here for our dedication to being able to contribute our time and talent and effort to raising this state up, which has many needs, right? We're well aware of the grave needs that exist. I hear the word right sizing and I cringe a little bit, because I see, my interpretation is that we're actually reducing the footprint, and we already have reduced the accessibility of what we offer students to the extent that our Promise Scholarship does not cover, the tuition that it used to. And that has nothing to do with how well we teach our courses or how well we recruit students. That's a financial barrier that exists that used to be invested in by the state of West Virginia. If we look at the funding levels, revenue coming in over the last, since 2017, has almost doubled. Like the state budget is very healthy. But if you look at funding levels coming from the state legislature, it's actually down in real dollars. And I see no discussion of how that disinvestment in what we do, and as well as other higher education institutions in the state, is going to be able to, we're leaving a vacuum. We're leaving needs that are going to be unmet. Maybe we're right sizing it to the extent that our budget allows, but our budget is being capped by a limit and a disinvestment of dollars coming from the state. So I see that part of the equation hasn't really been addressed. And so I wanted to ask, as a long-winded way to kind of get to the point, which is, when will I feel like we've been coasting on the hard work that was funded. We had investments kind of maybe I recall about 2014, 15, 16, there was this kind of influx, and we coasted, and we see the state budget doing well, and we're going to cut off the tree at the roots. And I fear that will be really hard to recover from. So is there any effort to restore the level of investment in higher education in West Virginia? Do you foresee that happening in the future, or is this kind of becoming a lower priority for the state by and large? I guess, Rod, that's probably a question for you.
Sure, and it's a really good question. The past couple of years, we've actually seen our appropriation increase a little bit, $2 or $3 million a year. Moving forward, we are not up at the high water mark we were back to 2011 or 2012. Honestly, I think with having 5,000 students less than we had back in 2013, 2014, it's hard, not impossible, but it's pretty hard to argue for more money given less enrollment, and particularly because our enrollment has dropped a little bit more in-state versus out of state. I think that's a challenge. But it's not for lack of trying in conversations in Charleston. And so what we've been told is that they are much more likely to fund projects for areas of growth as opposed to backfilling operations. And so this year, the university was successful in two different ways. The legislature set aside $200 million to take care of deferred maintenance needs on all of our campuses. And we're hopeful to get as much of that as we can from a WVU perspective. And the legislature also awarded $50 million, assuming there's sufficient surplus, to enhance our ability to move the needle on cancer results in Appalachia. And so that'll be a joint effort between WVU and the WVU health system. But there's an instance where the legislature has taken, adding those two together, $250 million, one-time monies, albeit, the $250 million of the one-time surplus that they're doing and dedicating that into higher ed. And so, starting with the 50 that we're getting on cancer, and you add that to the, hopefully the 50 to 60, maybe even 70 or 80 that we'll get from deferred maintenance over the next 2 to 3 years. And it's quite an infusion of additional monies from the state that we are getting moving forward. And so it would be great if they would just say, here's more money to backfill operations. But I think we're going to have to go on specific projects for whether they be for health or for economic reasons for the good of the state. And we certainly are at it almost on a daily basis with our legislature in WVU's value proposition and the need to invest.
What you kind of addressed this a little bit, but part of the drop in enrollment, right, is due to decreased accessibility. Like financial barriers are greater for our students today. And it's not because of, it basically they used to get more of a assistance from the state investment in our institution. And so there's kind of a correlation there that hasn't really been addressed, that we have a very low rate of attainment of higher education degrees in the state. And I fear that's going to become even lower, which is going to have, drastic cascading impacts. That part of the enrollment question, I think, really needs to be, we need to make that case that we're hurting our West Virginia residents in being able to attain a college degree, and that we're seeing them missing from our classrooms because of this disinvestment. I would just hope that that gets heard along the way somewhere.
Right.
All right, Nadia. Or Guthi, you have a question.
Yes, Nadia Barghouthi with the School of Medicine. I was wondering if there was going to be any, like, taking into consideration spousal hires. So, for example, West Virginia always has a physician shortage, and many of our physicians at WVU Medicine are married to people who work at WVU, the school. So I was wondering if that is something that's going to be considered when looking at some of these non-academic units that we were discussing.
You want me to, I'll take that, Rob. Nadia, what I would say to you is that this is in many ways a small community, and we're all connected in some way. I mean, it's honestly, everywhere you go, there are dual hires, people know people. And so I think that the goal will be to be as transparent as possible about these decisions and to try to do the right thing. But that, I think we have to be aware that if, for example, we eliminate a position, that individual may be married or be a partner to someone in another unit. I mean, we need to consider that, but it's going to be tough because we do need to make some reductions. But I really appreciate what you're saying.
Jonah Katz.
Hello. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out my video. Well, I can't get my video to work. This is the second or third time now we've heard about reductions in administrative FTEs. And I'm on the Hep C website right now. They have a personnel count on their human resources data portal. And it shows that since 2014 that we've lost about 1,000 classified employees who average about $38,000 a year. And we've added about 1,000 unclassified employees who average about $85,000 a year. So I'm just not seeing how that's consistent with the idea that we've already cut administrative positions. It looks like that must have added about $40 million to the administrative budget of the university, unless I'm misunderstanding something. Could you address that?
Yeah, you are. So I'm happy to address it. And I can, I'll get the data from our chief data officer where we got the information. So prior to 2014, there was a requirement in West Virginia that only 25% of our employees could be non-classified. Everybody else had to be classified. And it was completely different than the rest of the world works. Usually classified employees are designated as hourly employees and non-classified as salaried. However, we had a number of individuals at the institution that had to be designated as classified at the institution going forward for that. It caused a huge amount of problems, particularly in the IT space, in terms of job families, in terms of job ladders, in terms of recruiting, moving forward with the institution, and was really an outdated step moving forward. And so in 2014 or 2015, the legislature changed that. And so they said on a going forward basis, and the difference for WVU is that classified employees have progressive discipline and they're not at will, non-classified or not. And so we said that everybody who's currently then a classified employee will continue to be a classified employee. But going forward under legislative policy, if you are an hourly employee under the Fair Labor Standards Act, you'll be considered classified. And if you are a salaried employee for the Fair Labor Standards Act, you will be considered to be non-classified. Because the mix of hourly and salaried employees was artificially skewed by this limit on the number of non-classified individuals that the legislature had declared, over time, a number of positions that were forced to be posted as classified as individuals retired, they were reposted as non-classified positions, not with a salary change or anything like that, but there was an artificial distinction that prohibited us from labeling a salaried employee as a non-classified individual. And so that mix that you see at the Policy Commission in that report is purely a function of title and nothing to, or in classification and nothing to do with rate of pay.
All right. Any follow up? Okay. Rose Casey, you had someone you wanted to recognize?
They were recognized some time ago. I do have a question, but I'm not sure if I'm next in line.
I think Dan is next in line.
Yeah.
Thanks. Dan Totske, Everly College. I'm happy for the last description because I was going to say, I'm not going to lie, I got no clue what classified and non-classified means half the time. I've read it here or there, but I keep getting mixed up. So I appreciate the breakdown there. I don't really have a question so much as a comment, just noting just some of the back and forth that we've been having, and especially in response to Frankie's kind of question and rephrasing things. I think what is the concern among faculty and staff, and by that I mean people who make tens of thousands of dollars a year rather than hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, is that we hear about our positions being on the line as just the way it is. But when questions arise about higher up positions, there's a lot of defensiveness, which, yeah, I get that. We're defensive about our positions too. So I just want to say that, noting, because I feel like it goes back and forth, one of the morale issues that we are all facing and that our constituents are all facing is that we hear, hey, buddies, your programs, they're probably cut. Sorry, that's the way it is. We got to right size. Maybe that's so. But when we're like, hey, is this equitable? You know, it's we're working really hard and that would be a morale issue. Same, right? And so I think it's just a matter of tone that it is. as a communication person, right, in the comm department, PhD in comm, that's something I'm sensitive to. It is, I don't know, that part of the reason I think when folks keep asking these questions is that the tone of these things make it feel like, hey, Betty's, your positions, bye-bye, but ours are not. Maybe, right, I get that administrators have administrating to do, and we need to have administrating to do the organization. It's a matter of the tone and some of the responses. So not a question, just a comment. Thanks for the time. And I will not talk.
So if I could, and I want to separate a couple of things, if I could, and say that, the question on my salary and whether I should take a pay cut or make a donation to the university to help moving through is a different question from whether I'm going to go to senior administrators in enrollment or student life or the provost office and tell them that they have to take a pay cut. And so, if everybody would feel better, we can talk about my particular circumstances and if that would make feel better from that communications perspective moving forward. My defensiveness is not over me, and I'm happy to talk about that here in just a second. But what I'm trying to be clear on is that there are a number of really good people at the institution at a variety of salary levels who are compensated for the work that they do. And what's equitable and what's fair are two different things. And where I'm coming from is, as a leadership position, we do not think it is a fair thing to do to require across the board to say, if you make X dollars, you're going to take a pay cut to continue to work at WVU moving forward. That's different from a personal decision that I might make as it relates to what I'm giving up to help make it through this particular piece. And you raise a really good point about defensiveness. And so let me just take a minute to say this. I wish more than anything, and people will probably hold this against me going forward, I wish I had seen around corners better or seen things differently 2 years ago. And I've done a lot of soul searching over the past several months as it relates to how I can do a better job. I had someone tell me last week, if this were the private sector, I may not be around because I let things go too far before we move forward as an institution moving forward. And that may very well be where things would move forward. And so I do wish that I had raised issues earlier. We can talk through the fact that I didn't think during COVID, when we were seeing enrollment declines, that things wouldn't bounce back. I wish in hindsight I hadn't made that calculation. I wish I had seen things a lot differently and regret that I didn't take actions earlier to move things forward all the way around as a particular institution. And that's something that I have to live with. And it's not that I could have magically done something on enrollment. I went back through actually and looked at it. We had campus conversations as early as 2015 and 2016 talking about expense reductions and how enrollment was declining. And we can pull all those out and sort of go on how we've transformed for all those things. So I apologize if I've been defensive. It's not, it's, a question on my salary is different from the others. And I do feel strongly that that would be harmful to do that on a broad scale basis. And I do understand that people are frustrated and that morale is low and that this really sucks to get through. And I wish that I had been stronger earlier to move things forward as an institution and put us in a better position. I think hindsight would be 2020, living through a pandemic and seeing some of the enrollment losses that we're looking at from 2014 and 15 and thinking that those were temporary and we'd have bounce backs. I certainly wish that I had looked at things differently moving forward and how we do this. And so my job at this point is, how do we pick these things up and move forward? And then I'll stop rambling here in just a second, Scott. But the only point I was trying to make is to the comment on shared services and some of the administrative units. If we do need to make additional cuts, we will. But there have been cuts to some of those units where if they go deeper, we're talking about the provision of services that if we don't, if we do those, could have significant consequences at the institution. And so to me, I think that just needs to be taken in as part of where we go on the overall perspective. So that's, you know, if people feel better to get a pound of flesh out of me, I'm happy to talk about sacrifices I'm trying to make and have made and committed to on how this moves forward. Some of these things as it relates to leadership, I think are personal decisions on what we do as an institution.
Dan, can I just thank you, Rob? And I don't want to leave my colleague hanging out there on his own. Dan, let me just say that from a communications perspective as well, because I do understand that, that I think we could have done a better job communicating all of the changes that have been made in recent years and the efforts to protect the academic side of the house. And I'm telling you that some budget cuts were really shouldered primarily at the central level, and there was a lot done to spare the academic enterprise. I don't think we talked about that. We just did it. But now, in light of everything that's happening, you know, I think it's important that we do share the efforts that have been made over the past several years to try to preserve the academic side of the house. It's come to this now because every effort has been made to spare academics. And now we're at this point where we do have to look at that additionally. That's what I would share with you.
Thanks, you both. I appreciate it. I wanted to be clear. I didn't mean to have specifics in that. That wasn't necessarily my point, but I do appreciate that. And I think, Provost Reed, to what you were speaking to, that was sort of the general point of, I think where a lot of, I mean, this is me personally, my perspective, a lot of people will have other opinions, I'm sure, a matter of where this is coming from. It seems framed as all academics all the time. Maybe it is because of that process. I think where a lot of the frustration comes from is, okay, what about everything else? What about the whole unit? So that was more my point. I did not, but I appreciate the perspective on that. I'm going to put my hand down now. Thanks. Turn my video off.
I just want to follow up real quick and I'll move on to the next question. We hear a lot of a very well-organized process for reviewing the academic programs, and I think that's because that impacts us the most. I think one thing people are wanting to hear are what are the processes to review and evaluate these other units. And if that's a clearly defined process, I think that answers a lot of questions. And commend the provost that you've spoken about the academic support units already, and there seems to be a process in your submitting feedback. But I think that would.
So let me just jump in, Scott. So I announced IT merger 6 weeks ago, and it's done and implemented. And so just on the final point on this is like that puts on a path to savings immediately. And so I'm happy to talk through a process, but on the units where we can move quicker, I'm not going to take 6 months and review something when I tell my leadership, I need this done by the end of the fiscal year, go merge and move forward so that we can get cuts in as quickly as we can. And we move forward on it, on that. So I'm happy to talk through processes and how we work through all this moving forward. But I'm also asking my teams to move as quickly as they possibly can to get the savings generated to move forward as an institution. And as I indicated, there are 6 people at ITS that are there today and will not be there July 1. And so I think we need to understand that when the administrative units can move quicker to get cost savings, we ought to let them do it and understand that we are moving on that particular piece. And I'm happy to provide an exhaustive document on all we're doing on the administrative side and have done moving forward. This is not an academic only enterprise on cost reductions for the institution.
So Krista, go ahead.
Okay, hi, Krista Brisock from Eberly. Just like Dan was the communications guy talking about tone, I am the math person. I will be talking about numbers. So this is specifically from the math department, but I can see in the chat that this same sentiment is coming up elsewhere. So historically, large enrollment math courses have had a team of 2 faculty member leaders, a coordinator and a lead instructor. These courses impact a very large number of students, and increasing student success in these courses has historically been a big priority at WVU. Recently, we were informed that the course coordination stipend would be reduced by almost $3,000, and lead instructor positions would be eliminated completely. Most of the people who serve in lead instructor and coordinator roles are teaching faculty, and most of these faculty have base salaries less than $50,000. Cutting these stipends and leadership positions is reducing take-home pay for many of these faculty members by anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000, and some up to $20,000. That may not seem like a large number to administrators, but for faculty with base salaries under $50,000, this income reduction will have a dramatic effect on them and their families. These are faculty members who have close interactions with large number of students, so impacts to their livelihoods will almost certainly trickle down to the students. Cutting lead instructor positions is going to have a very large impact on how these coordinated courses run, which is also going to negatively impact our students. It's one thing to ask faculty to lean in and do more work for the same pay, but it's an entirely different thing to ask faculty to do more for less pay. Our questions are these. Is the administration expecting students to have the same experiences in these high enrollment, high stakes courses, despite cutting the leadership teams in half? Has administration considered the financial risks of decreased retention due to these courses receiving less support? And number 2, how can the administration justify cutting income for some of the lowest paid faculty who teach the biggest number of students, who have the biggest student footprint, if you will? 5,000 is 10% of 50,000, but only 1% of 500,000. Thank you.
I'll answer that, Krista, to the best that I can and my ability. And thank you for being patient. I know you've had your hand raised for a long time. So what I would say to you is that what I talked to you about today is a central process of program review and analysis. What you are talking about are decisions that have been made at the college level in order for the colleges to meet their budget reduction. And so what I would say to you is that we are aware of this, but I can't speak specifically to the math department and those administrative stipends or the stipends that were provided to faculty, for example, to oversee courses. I can't comment on that right now. If you have a question on how that was done and whether that is appropriate, certainly send that. You can send that to our the academic transformation website. We will look into it with math. You know, I think
I know it's not just math. I know this is happening elsewhere too.
Right. And I know, you know what, Krista, without being able to speak about specifics, because we have, you know, I don't know every unit. We don't know every unit in our office. But what I would say to you is I know that these stipends, sometimes they were associated also with course release. Sometimes it was one, sometimes it was both. And the colleges have had to make hard decisions about where to reduce costs. You know, I know these stipends that folks have grown to rely on them, and I really appreciate it. They're not part of the base salary, but I hear what you're saying. And there are, you know, there will be impacts from this that are not positive. But I do know that is a decision that is being made at the quote unquote local level.
So I guess maybe my comment would be, we have been told that there will be no pay cuts, and then I go to my department and being told that my pay will be cut. So I guess maybe watch your language when you say that there will be no pay cuts, because pay cuts are happening just at the level that people get paid the least. So
not salary cuts, but I hear what you're saying. There's an expectation of pay based on a stipend that you would have received in the past. Absolutely.
Right. Stipends that really help those of us that make extremely less than national average for our jobs.
Understood.
All right. Kim Kelly.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. I would like to recognize Marcello Napolitano, and I'm not his senator, but I'm hoping someone from engineering can step in and recognize him if that needs to happen.
Corey, can you allow Marcello to speak?
Yeah, he's been granted permission.
Marcello,
Guys, can you hear me? You all
we can hear you.
Yes, I'm very happy to hear the word transparency. And it's a very welcome word. The transparency would have helped a lot a few years ago when we made a decision to pull out of the ACM. And this is what I like to talk about. I would like to ask a question about the ACM. I believe we are like a bleeding patient on a surgical room. We're bleeding student. And probably this, I consider this probably the biggest problem we got to address. I believe that models were made for pulling out the ACM. There was a unilateral, probably whole decision. I believe that we're paying very, very dearly for that decision. One thing about faculty, we know students, we know curriculum, we also know students, we know our student population. I have a first-hand data that showed me that the enrollment in one of my classes, which is the kind of like one of the key classes in aerospace, has dropped more than 50% in only 3 years. I believe my chairman has plenty of data to back up the conclusion that the ACM, pulling out of the ACM has deeply, deeply hurt us. I like to know, assuming that we all recognize that this decision was based on models which theoretically look good, but eventually don't work. Do we have any plan to go back to ACM, especially now that we are experiencing a demographic cliff when it comes to population of students from West Virginia?
Marcello, let me answer that to the best of my ability. I know we are having folks from enrollment management come to the next meeting who I think can answer that more specifically. I'll tell you what I know, and I don't know if anyone else on our team has answers, but what I understand about ACM, that decision was made several years ago, prior to me coming into this role. But my understanding was that those students as a whole retained far less and graduated at a lower rate than students who were not ACM. And you could come up with all sorts of reasons why that is, right? But that is the data that we have. And a decision was made that in the end, it was probably not beneficial to those students or even wise economically to continue with that. And instead, the enrollment management worked on scholarshiping the best students from those areas. I do know, I just happen to know because your chair asked me about this, and I talked to our team that engineering was minimally as a whole impacted by the changes in ACM, but other units were impacted or other areas across the institution were impacted. And what I would say is what I know is that certainly we're going back and looking at the data. And there are discussions about expanding to reciprocity agreements with some other states. We currently have one with Ohio. So that's what I would share with you. I think you could get more detailed information at the July meeting. That help?
Yes, can I briefly reply?
Sure.
Yes, I'll be looking for that information on the July meeting. I believe that that's very timely. I do have a comment. If we decide to pull out of the ACM on the ground that we were not getting quality students, all we had to do was to raise our standards rather than completely pulling out of the ACM. That will be my guess.
I hear you. And those are always very complicated decisions, but I hope that's enough for now. And we can address this more at the July meeting.
I think perhaps when enrollment management comes, if they could maybe provide some data on the impacts that the discounting and scholarshipping had as alternatives for the ACM and how successful those efforts were in attracting and retaining students, could provide some helpful context to that conversation.
Scott, that would be great. And I would definitely have you reach out directly to George Zimmerman and let him know that might be useful information to share at the next meeting.
All right, Rose Casey.
Hi, yes, Rose Casey, Eberly College. Okay, so we are looking at big cost cutting. We know that many of these costs are hitting our staff and lowest paid faculty the most. I know from speaking to staff friends and colleagues that there was a huge wave of staff layoffs last Thursday. And I know from speaking with faculty friends and colleagues that we're deeply concerned about that. We're not just here worrying about our own jobs, but worrying about our administrative staff too. So on that basis, to kind of slightly change tack ever so slightly, I have a question that many of my constituents have asked. How much is WVU paying for compulsory Clifton Strengths training? There are two related questions here. What does the university plan to do with the data that it receives when anyone completes the Clifton Strengths training? There's been a concern around privacy there. Also, another question that I've been asked to ask, has the university considered that badges featuring President Gee's face and apparently other iconic WV images might be a little tone deaf in the circumstances of what's happening right now to, again, majority faculty and staff when we're talking about administrative positions? Just to go back to Dan's point earlier, we are not, when that concern comes up, we're not as faculty worrying, asking for there to be greater transparency about whether administrators will be assessed for RIFs. We're asking, what we're asking about is whether administrators will be assessed for RIFs. We are deeply concerned about administrative staff being laid off. We know that that's a problem. So again, the question is, just to be super clear, how much is WVU paying for compulsory Clifton Strengths training? What would be the cost of pulling out of that contract? If we're having to look at massive cost-cutting savings, might this also be one area where we can take some steps in ways that would actually honestly help staff and faculty morale as well? Because as I say, this process seems, what I'm hearing from constituents is that this process seems a little tone deaf. Thank you.
So I will, if someone else knows the number on Clifton strengths training, I just don't have it off the top of my head, but I'll report back to Scott and Frankie on what that amount is. I just don't know. And then Rose, honestly, I don't, you indicated something about President Gee either being in the news or doing something, but I wasn't specific. I didn't understand what your specific request.
No, not about being in the news. I have seen there are circulating. I understand that badges will be distributed to students in the fall with President Gee's face on. Is that not true? Are people distributing fake badges?
So I'm not in charge of badges. I'll say that. I don't know the answer on that particular piece, but I can inquire as well. I just don't know on that particular piece.
Buttons like a.
Yeah. I got it now. Yeah. I will check on that particular piece. So Clifton Strengths training funding or cost expense, and then badges, particularly badges that may show the bow tie in some form or fashion. Mary Ann, did you want to jump?
I think just buttons. I think that's what you meant, right, Rose? Buttons.
Yeah,
And
okay.
I know that we've had, like, there's a bunch of them that are in-house that were made a long time ago, but maybe the point is you're saying maybe we shouldn't be sharing those at this time. There. Okay. All right, we hear you.
Yep, thank you.
Victor Musino. Victor's
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Victor.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much for the second opportunity. I am Victor Musino from Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering. I have been at WVU for 38 years. And I have talked to several faculty members who have expressed to me some concerns that I would like to share with you. Very quickly, WVU is not a factory, it's not a bank, it's not a real estate company. It is first and foremost an educational institution. And the pillars that govern our activity are teaching, research, and service. Now, one thing that is very clear to all faculty members, and we live by that, is that when there is any kind of academic malpractice, that swift consequences follow. And we don't question that. We accept that. We live by that. So what happens in the classroom and in the research laboratories are the most important activities at the university. And anything else, any other activity by non-faculty members are meant to provide support, to provide guidance, and to assist faculty members make WVU what it is. Now, the current crisis has been produced by a number of actions, mistakes, whatever you want to call them, but that have not been produced by faculty members. In other words, the current crisis has not been caused by what faculty members do in the classrooms or in the research laboratories. Nevertheless, to navigate this financial crisis, most of the burden will be placed on faculty members by not having access to resources, by having travel restrictions, by not having access to overhead, by the reduction in force. And that has already devastated the morale, and the performance will be, affected somehow. It will produce also an exodus of bright and young faculty members, and I think that's already in motion. So my question to you is, and this is for the administrators, is this: what are the swift actions or consequences that will be conducted for mistakes or any kind of malpractice, administrative malpractice that took place outside the classrooms and research laboratories? Acknowledging that helps a lot, because we're in this, the house is on fire, and now we have to get through this. So the question is, what are those actions that will take place to address those mistakes? Thank you.
Does anyone want to answer that? Victor, I can just say to you, and I think maybe, let me just share with you my position. And that is, this is not a manufactured crisis. This is a real budget shortfall. This is a budget problem that has to be addressed. Whether the administration could have identified it sooner, that is definitely another question, but that this is an actual structural deficit that has occurred, not because money was mismanaged or there was malfeasance, but because we've had declines in enrollment and we are facing future declines in enrollment. I hear what you're saying. I hear the desire for there to be some sort of punishment, but the reality is this is not a manufactured crisis or one that was created by malfeasance. What could have happened is that we would have known sooner, but we would still have been required to take action. Rob, do you want to follow up with anything?
Sure. So I think there are a number of headwinds that we're facing and things that have happened that have nothing to do with whether anyone did anything wrong moving forward. The fact is, we have 5,000 students less today than we had in 2014. And so I actually think we're all accountable for that fact. And I think that if faculty are going to take the position that nothing that happened in the classroom had any impact on word of mouth or anything of that value for students and enrollment. I think there's plenty of things that we could have done better, but part of our problem is that drop in enrollment that we have seen. And that's something we all, I would hope, would want to try to do better at, as opposed to just saying, well, this has nothing to do with me. This is somebody else. Let's go chop off an arm or a leg or a head or move a senior administrator out, because that's not going to fix the particular challenge going forward. I will tell you the $10 million PEIA increase that we got this year was not the result of any malfeasance of any administrator. Again, the 1,000 student drop in enrollment that we saw this year, I don't know how that you could put that malfeasance on or say that that's malfeasance of someone in my position or finance moving forward. I don't think you can put the inflation that has impacted this institution moving forward. If this could be simply solved by me resigning and everybody blaming me, I would have already been out the door. We have some headwinds that as an institution we have to address together. And, you know, we can talk about blame and who did this or who did that and move forward on that and answer a lot of questions. At the end of the day, we've dropped enrollment, our expenses are up, our state appropriations are not going to save us, and we've got to figure out a pathway collectively forward as to how we move forward as an institution. I'm willing to accept responsibility and have talked about that previously moving forward, but this is not, you know, and maybe it is, maybe you guys think that is in which you should go to the board and the president, but I don't like, I don't, it's not as if we've grown enrollment and our financial challenges are still there. There's some headwinds that are real that we have to face as an institution.
If I may just a quick comment. I don't think that the idea is to find a scapegoat, but I think that faculty members are feeling that faculty members are being scapegoated on this because the consequences are going to be carried heavily by faculty members who have continued to support the mission of the university, who have continued to get programs accredited, who have continued to do research, but who are now being severely, loaded with the burden of this situation that we have. It's that feeling that we have that we are being held to consequences for things that we didn't do. And we are not even sure that these consequences will get us through. Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? And that, I don't think that that's a clear situation. And what I would like to offer and would like to ask you to just think about it is that the low morale and the frustration is already in place. The exodus of bright and productive faculty is already in motion. So where are we going to find ourselves 5 years from now or 10 years from now? I think this is going to last for a long, long time. And it's difficult to accept that we find ourselves in this situation suddenly. How could it not be, envisioned, prevented? And how come not every institution is in the same boat? COVID, the inflation and all those things and the enrollment decline, those are affecting many institutions, but not all the institutions are in the same boat that we are. So it's difficult to accept that how this happens suddenly is, that's very difficult to digest. And to offer counseling services to deal with the stress, I don't think that's really appropriate. So I would just like to offer those comments, those feelings by several of my colleagues and myself. And I do it respectfully. I'm just not very polished in making it, sugar coated, but I just say it as it is. So thank you.
All right. Amy, go ahead and ask one more question.
Yeah, I know I've taken up some time already, but just to kind of what Victor was saying, I think really hits the nail on the head. There's this asymmetry between the accountability and the consequences. And when I look at the state spending on higher education, 2013, it was 464 million. 2023 state appropriations is 442 million. That flat rate adjusted, in real dollars, we had more funding in 2013 than we do now. So in some level, there has been an adjustment, right? We have had that budget decline to account for the lower enrollment. And we see that other states are investing in their education. We can't compete with Florida with their $5,000 a year tuition. You could take the $8,000 you'd spend as an in-state student in West Virginia, go get residency in Florida and save money on your tuition. We'll never grow enrollment if we're not making our product as attractive as possible and competing with the other public institutions, I think, that are doing those things.
Let me
So
just
I
say,
will-
can I just say one thing, Rob? And that is, I hear what everybody is saying, and I know that there is frustration, and I know there's anger and a sense of who's to blame. I get it. But higher education is going through an incredible time of disruption. You have to know that. You have to have been reading that. You have to see it in the Chronicle. You have to see it in the New York Times. You have to see it inside higher ed. This is not just us. It is not. We are being very transparent about what we're facing and addressing this. And I guarantee you, if other universities aren't doing it now, they will do it. We are in a time where college participation has declined, where state support has declined, where the attitude about the necessity of a college degree has changed. And it's terrible, okay? But it is the world in which we live. And to say that you're focused entirely on your teaching and entirely on your research and entirely on your service, I get it. But there's a bigger world around there that is, things are happening, and we all have to be aware of that. Again, I understand the frustration. I understand the fact that this seems sudden. I understand that this is going to hurt a lot of people. And I shouldn't say we understand that as an administration, but we are not alone. And this is not just isolated to WVU. We may be experiencing some of these things more intensely right now, but other universities are also grappling with this, except perhaps those in the Sun Belt states.
Right. So, Anne Marie, one more quick one and we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. And I think somebody just spoke to it in their comment in the chat. I think what Rob did earlier, not in the second part, was a great step in addressing a lot of the angst that, like, I'm hearing from our faculty. And the bigger question is not that we're here, but how quickly we got here and who wasn't watching. And I really appreciated Rob taking, saying, he wishes he had seen this coming. So I think what the next step would be saying, what systems are being put in place to not get to this after we've gone through this hardship. Who will be responsible? And this is more a comment, not a question, to make sure that, can we get some more projections? Can we get projections earlier? Can we do some better modeling to ensure we don't fall back into this? I think those are that's the missing piece that could potentially start to fill that gap. Just a comment.
Thanks, Anne Marie. All right, so couple of comments. So I know there's been a lot of questions asked and quite a few answers have come through. And some of those answers have been communicated to smaller groups and various email chains. We spoke this morning in our leadership meeting that we're going to try and start collating those questions and answers on the Faculty Senate webpage. Recognize we may have not done as good a job as we could have in making sure the answers we're receiving to these questions are broadly disseminated. So we're going to make an effort to start doing that. It'll take us a little bit of time, lots of different email threads with questions and answers that we're kind of fielding. So we'll start to try and get questions and answered more broadly disseminated. I think that will help. So is there any new business? All right. Thank you, Provost Reed, Vice President Alsop. I know this is tough. It's tough for everyone. Unpleasant experience for all of us. So we do appreciate you being willing to come and answer questions and talk with us.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Anytime. Thank you, Scott.
So, all right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.